Before we begin, thank you very much to Sound Bluster for joining my Patreon campaign. Thank you very much for your support. You know, I just got caught up on my Patreon shoutouts. Finally, it's taken me all month to get to this point where I didn't have anyone to shout out, and then someone else decides to be super generous and kind and help me out and gave me one more to do. So, thank you very much for doing that. You had me worried now that if I ever get more than 30 in a month, like, what am I going to do? I don't want people waiting a month just to get their shout out and gotta figure out something else new. But thank you guys for your support. Love you for it. Now, we used to have this glorious thing where if we didn't like what Takara, or we didn't like what Hasbro was doing with a toy, we could go get Takara's version of it. And the paint job would be so much nicer. It'd be more cartoon accurate. Didn't do anything weird to the gray plastic to make it not so flat colored that Hasbro was like terrified of in like the mid-2000s. Those heydays are over, unfortunately, but there are a few standouts where if you want to go back and get one of these toys from yesteryear, there's a few that you have to go out of your way to get the Japanese version of. It's just not negotiable. They are so superior or do so much that's different that it is absolutely worth tracking down the originals. Now, this is a big thing for a lot of toys, and most of it boils down to color scheme. And I've tried very hard to keep those off of this list, though there are a few that are here simply because the color scheme and the paint job are way better. But for the most part, I'm going to try to keep it to far more significant changes from the US and Japanese versions of the toy. So, without further ado, these are just 10 of the Transformers that you need to buy the Japanese version of. And we're going to start number 10 with a toy line I talked about not too long ago, and that is alternators. Now, if you want die-cast as part of your alternators experience, then yes, you're always going to go with the Binaltech release over the alternator. But there is one significant difference in one particular alternator character that does sway things a little bit more, and that would be Windcharger. So in the American version, he has this weapon that is on the packaging announced as a shield, but your imagination would probably have you call it a scanner at best. It's just an engine block with a handle on it and what seems to be half of a hinge. That is because the Japanese version, Overdrive, had a full-length rifle instead. Honda of America did not like their toy being based on they didn't like a concealed weapon coming with their toy, essentially. So they took issue with the American version, so Takara or Hasbro had to completely remove the barrel. No problem with Honda in Japan, however, so the toy got to come out unaltered. Yeah, it seems like a pretty small thing, but when you consider like the only real accessory he came with was significantly altered, and basically any identity it has as any kind of weaponry was completely removed, all for something that was okay with Honda in Japan, but not okay with Honda in America. A little bit weird. And it's really unfortunate because it's the only one that did something other than just become an engine. It also became like part of the drivetrain too. So it's a really cool trick it does that the American version never gets to do. Number 9 is going to kick off a block of toys that fall into the gold plastic syndrome category. Now, I could have made this the whole list because of course there are, but a lot of times GPS targets Takara toys the same way it targets Hasbro's because they're trying to use the same colors. In fact, some Takara releases are the ones that are more fragile due to GPS than the American ones. But these are 3 in particular that are just so much different in Japan because they avoided using the plastics that were the toy's downfall in America. The most significant one, at least size-wise, is Air Attack Optimus Primal. This one came out in RID here in America, even though it's the Beast Machine's character, and it's GPS riddled. This one is with its size especially makes it really susceptible and really hard to work with. However, the first release in Japan, or at least the first real release, was Encore Optimus Primal, which not only came with a far more significantly show-accurate color scheme, it also did away with the gold plastic that was problematic. So not only do you have a far more screen accurate Optimus Primal, you've got one that can actually last you a while too. Now, technically, there is another Asia release of this figure that came before, but for the most part, I'm trying to grade based on the first ones that came out in Japan specifically versus the one that came out in America specifically. You'll note a lot of these toys have some altered versions and some improved versions ahead of their original release. But for now, I'm just comparing the first release. And this one was technically the first release in Japan for the toy. And it's a far more significant release than the one we got in America, which I guess considering it came out so much later than Air Attack Optimal did, it had the benefit of time on its side, which is not what a GPS toy typically has. I'm going to cheat a little bit for number 8 because technically this is not the same character. It is the same toy, however, and as I explained, it is the first use in America and Japan for the mold, so it is an equivalent release to each other. And this is a much more famous GPS sufferer. We're talking about Torka. I had Torka. I loved this toy. A lot of people actually really love this toy, which is interesting considering that it was never featured in the show, and it was pretty simple as far as Beast Wars toys go. He's one of those that just kind of stands up, and that's most of your transformation. But a lot of people just really like Torka. I liked him too, but I like him better when I didn't know that he was entirely fragile because he's mostly gold plastic. Really unfortunate. Now, in Japan, you have the Blendtron Eleforka, or Elforka, depending on how you translate it. Eleforka rolls off my tongue better, so we're going with that. Not only do I like the color scheme better, the blue is still not accurate to a real-world elephant. I mean, nor is the dark blue for the Orca part, but it's at least closer. The colors blend together better, appropriate for a Blendtron. But more importantly, yeah, not a piece of gold plastic in sight. This, because Torka has this strange nostalgia and love in the fandom, this has made his Japanese release highly sought after, and on the aftermarket, it's crazy expensive to get your hands on Elforka. Made even harder by the fact that he was one of the last wave releases for Beast Wars Neo, making him even harder to come by. But if you want that toy, and if you want your half killer whale, half elephant in your collection, you're going to have to spend big money to get the one that will actually survive a transformation. Last one for our GPS lineup, and this one is probably the one that people try to replace the most. Again, crazy aftermarket price. But it is for a far more significant character. We have to talk about Megatron now. So the Hasbro release of Megatron used this really dark brown plastic that, while not technically gold plastic, was also incredibly brittle and fragile. Now we call it GPS in general, but there are other colors of plastic that are very susceptible to age and very fragile once they start hitting this certain point. And the dark brown plastic they used for Megatron is absolutely among them. It's very common for this toy to be broken in half completely. Now, if you go get the metals version, you're going to lose some elements. The bronze is going to be a little bit darker, not quite as rich in color, and the gray is more flat. It's not metallic like the American version is. The trade-off is that fragile brown plastic is now completely black, and now the toy is far more stable. See, it's not just the fact that the brown plastic was fragile. It's also the fact that the Transmetal Megatron's transformation system is not the best engineered. It wasn't really the plastic being fragile that broke it. It's the waist joint not quite being designed properly. The brown plastic couldn't handle it. It's not strong enough to compensate. The black plastic of the Takara version is. So this is the version that will actually hold up over the test of time. And if you want what I find to be Beast Wars Megatron's best form, you have to go to the Metals release. And that's actually what I did. I did a whole review, basically because it's my favorite Beast Wars toy. And yeah, if I get, getting the better version of it, oh yeah, makes me happy. We're going to go to another toy I am very passionate about, and this comes from Galaxy Force and Cybertron, which you guys should know, my absolute favorite Transformers toy line. And we're going to go to one of my favorite designs of all time from that series. We are first going to talk about Supreme Starscream that came out in America. Now, the Supreme $50 price class, because yeah, the toys bigger than liters used to be $50. I know, sucks. But they needed something, because they didn't have anything lined up for Cybertron to replace Omega Supreme and the Omega Sentinel toys from Energon. So what do? They took Starscream, upscaled him to Supreme class, reworked him a little bit that was accurate to later depictions in the show, admittedly. But the toy was never designed to be that big, so it did feel clunky and it did feel like low on features for a toy of its size. Really, the only thing going for it was big and bulky. If we go to the original version, it is Voyager scale, and it feels appropriate for a Voyager. It plays nicer, just because it's so much easier to handle for how limited the toy technically is. On top of that, you are losing out on a lot of things that makes this toy really, really cool. Aside from the fact your firing missile rifle is not included in the Supreme version. It's replaced by an arm cannon. Also, you are missing out on one of the coolest gimmicks in Cybertron, which is the fact that one key slot on the back can open up both arm blades, even though he has full articulation in his arms. I think it's an incredibly cool trick. Now, this toy did come out in America under a completely different color scheme, a few times, actually, but they never released it like this. So, keep in mind, half of Cybertron, or more than half, he was depicted in this size compared to the other Decepticons. The Supreme class, the gigantic one, took a long time to come around in that show. So if you want one that's technically screen accurate and scaled to the rest of the Decepticon forces in that series, you're going to need this one. And this one is not easy to come by anymore. You're not going to believe me when I tell you who this list is. You're not going to believe me when I tell you who I'm going to tell you to go buy and spend more on the import version than the original American version. You're not going to believe this, but it's Hot Shot. In fact, this one is a tie between two different Hot Shots that essentially are here for the same reason. So the first one is going to be the original Armada release. Now, if you ever paid really close attention to your Hot Shots, have you ever noticed that his hands are molded a little bit differently from each other? So that is because that this toy originally featured a light-up gimmick in its right hand. The idea being that when you attach the Starsaber to his right hand, he could light it up, because the Starsaber was associated with Hotshot in the show. It didn't work well, but it's an added feature that also explains a lot of the little design quirks that this toy also suffered from. So another reason why the toy came out so bad was because it had to work in an LED gimmick in a very compact space. So you have even more reason for why he's iffy. But if you need a Hot Shot in your life, you can go get the Takara one, which is not only going to have the light-up gimmick, it's going to feature some better deco choices. In particular, the Autobot logo on the shoulder isn't going to be muddied out. It's actually going to look correct. The other one we have to talk about is the Universe version of Hot Shot, which is actually more significant because the Japanese version actually included two accessories that never got included in the American version until the eventual BotCon retool of it. So this one had a nice little feature where you had two extra missile launchers that could attach to his arms or hold in his hands, and in vehicle mode they formed exhausts and effect parts, which is a great little bit of extra usage and gave him a little bit more play value, which, the toy already had enough bad things going on about it. I really feel like it needed that little bit of extra edge. Now, the only reason these guns didn't come with them in America is likely a budgetary thing, especially considering he still had a mini-con that had to be budgeted into everything as well. It's just unfortunate because, the toy itself is already lacking, and this would have made it more fun. This would have helped him out a lot. But, if you want those Hot Shots, you got to go to Japan to get the fully featured ones. The last toy line to be able to have improvements over the Hasbro versions was Titans Return, or in Japan, Transformers United. Everything after that had to match globally, which meant being as, cheap and budgeted as the American versions of the toys. So they got a few out. They're just under the wire that were really feature loaded. And the one we're going to talk about is Hot Rod. Now, Titans Return already had a lot of features going for it that I actually really liked. As far as play value goes, I think it did a fantastic job. But the version of Hot Rod they got in Japan had so much more going on for it. Aside from a more show-accurate deco with darker reds and like a nicer chrome flame that I think looks really cool on it, you have the Target Master, which never got included in the American version. You've got a far better painted Titan Master. You also have some remolding done. The engine block on the top of the car can flip around to create a smoother, more accurate chest on Hot Rod's robot mode. Both extremely significant changes. Now, a lot of the Titans Return toys in Japan actually did come with Target Master components, or they came with additional heads even. But this one is the one that got that extra little bit of retooling to really push the envelope and really make it stand out compared to the others. So of all the ones from that series, I think this is the one that benefited the most and definitely is so loaded compared to the American version that, for a Hot Rod connoisseur, you had to import this one. It's just so much nicer than what we got here in America. Collectors have gravitated to the Japanese version of figures ever since the Unicron trilogy, because that's really where the two toy lines started to really separate as far as what Takara got to do versus what Hasbro got to do. But the very first toy that I think everyone in the fandom universally agreed, this is the one that I have to import rather than buy it domestically, was the 20th anniversary Optimus Prime, aka MP01, the very first masterpiece toy. Now, the American version does have some strange choices to it, and some not entirely Hasbro's fault. The main point for me is, of course, the cut smokestacks, which is a safety reason. They had no control over that. They had to cut them out. And the G1 Optimus Prime suffered the same thing for a long time. But more so the fact that they decided that the 20th anniversary Optimus Prime, the biggest, grandest, most highly detailed and featured Transformer they had ever done, decided that for its American release needed to be intentionally scuffed with a lot of random battle damage just sprayed all over the toy. And it's not even battle damage that matches anything in previous fiction. The very least, you would expect the scar on his side from the 86 movie. No, nothing like that. Just random blotches of black on him. Compare that to the Japanese version, which is clean and crisp and just looking so nice. Of course, the smokestacks are back as well. Everything looks proper. He looks very much like the Optimus Prime you would want as a celebratory piece, with the only oddness to him being the fact that his gun is gray instead of black for some reason. Another additional reason why you get the Japanese version was because the insert tray you could cut up and fold into an actual trailer for him. Now granted, it's not a functioning trailer, and nothing really hides the fact that it's Optimus Prime towing a cardboard box. There was no avoiding that. But at the very least, it was something, and it was better than the nothing that the American version got. And no American version of this Optimus came with a trailer. You had, later on, you had to import the perfect version to get an Optimus Prime that had the full semi-truck look. But for the most part, everyone went for MP01, which was probably one of the most commonly imported Transformers at the time, and still is just a really nice figure overall. If we're going to talk Optimus Prime on this list, I think it's fair we also talk about Megatron, but of course, no Megatron toy can be legally released in America, not at the masterpiece level anyway, because naturally, they all turn into guns, unless it's the movie ones, but you know what I mean. G1-wise, both MP Megatrons can't make the list. But we do have one that we can talk about, and that is going to be the Classics version. For those not in the know, there are some pretty strict laws when it comes to toy guns in America. They have to be very brightly colored, they have to have an orange barrel on them, they have to be very they have to be very distinguishable from a real gun at a moment's notice. Like if this toy was done in all silver, even with an orange cap, it would look like a real gun in a real moment where someone of authority needs to make a split-second decision about defending themselves. So this is a safety concern to the point where, like, the toy had to be released with these bright green and purple colors, and even this color scheme doesn't go far enough anymore. The last time this toy was released, the entire outer shell had to be bright translucent red in order to make it look as distinct from a real weapon as possible. We don't have those laws in Japan, however, where the Henkei release actually got to look like a really cool modernized Megatron with these bright hits of red all throughout its silver body in the gun mode, the orange cap getting replaced by black, no orange cap necessary on the barrel, which makes the robot mode look better, and overall, this seems to be a Megatron in the stylings of classics, where it was taking the original and upgrading it, throwing some extra color around, and basically just trying to bring out the best in a modern version. Now, if you want to go even farther, there is the Unite version of the toy, the United version, which does away with the chrome and some of the extra paint to be even more accurate. But again, we're talking about first releases. This one, yeah, if you were a collector for the Classics line, you had to get the Japanese version. It's just a color change, but it's such a significant color change. And especially for the purists that need that gray Megatron, it was a must-have. Even I've got this one. I don't even think I have the original anymore. Just this one. And to wrap it up, we've got one more of my personal favorites to talk about, and once again, we are going back to Cybertron and Galaxy Force for what I feel is something of an artistic achievement of a toy completely ruined by a Hasbro deco. We are talking about Vector Prime. Now, the Hasbro one here is on the left. So you see this bright white plastic, this really dull dark brown, and it just doesn't do the toy justice. Even in this photo example, you can see how the white starts washing out some of the really cool detailing they did on Vector Prime. In the Japanese version, you have all these etchings and exposed gears and all this that's supposed to convey what an ancient robot the character is. And it's really plays a lot to the character of the toy. That off-white they used, prevents it from all that detail from being washed out. The gray, the bronze tone they use is spot on. There's so many more intricate paint details, like the inside of the chest. So many more good things going on than the Hasbro version. It just looks dull and it looks cheap by comparison. And it's not even just the paint apps or the plastic choices here, but you also have the fact that the sails and the sword for Vector Prime are actually soft plastic in the American version, whereas the Japanese version, they are hard plastic, meaning not only do they retain their shape, they can also be painted to add to the look as well. I find the original Galaxy Force Vector Prime to be something of a piece of artwork, doing a perfect job of conveying this ancient and yet powerful robot who watches over all of time, whereas the Hasbro version just always looked like a cheap ripoff of it. Disappointing, to say the least. But that is going to be my list. Now, this is far from a definitive list, by the way. There are so many toys that were better in the Japanese version than the American versions, not just in color, but in features, build quality, sometimes sculpting and accessory. There's so many things about this, and like I said, there's so many examples. These are just 10 of them, and it's not even a top 10, it's just 10 of them. So let me know which ones that come to mind for you in the comments below, and we might hit this again at some point, because I'm sure there's 10 more of these I could cover, when we feel like it. But until then, thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Guys, I am facing the most powerful enemy any YouTuber can face, the algorithm, and I need your help to defeat him. hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment. Every time you do, we attack that algorithm and we drive it back until it can no longer defeat this channel. Thank you very much.